Welcome to Trials and Triumphs, the podcast that dives deep into the heart of public education K-12. I'm Maria, a life coach, a school counselor, and a catalyst for change in education. I have 30 years of experience on the front lines, supporting parents, teachers, and students to transform how they relate to themselves, to school, and to each other. We're on a mission here to shine a light on what is really happening in our schools. We're here to uncover the trials, celebrate the triumphs, and reimagine what's possible for kids. And if you're a parent, a teacher, or care deeply about education, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. We want you in this conversation. I am so thrilled to welcome back Stephanie Rabbers, a registered professional counselor with more than 3 decades of experience walking alongside youth, families, and professionals. As the founder of family-centered consulting services, Stephanie has a unique perspective on what it takes to support a child at home or at school. She is a children's book author, a parent of 3 kids, and working on her relationship developmental intervention consultant certification. Her background includes mental health support for at-risk youth, family therapy, and clinical consulting. She's passionate about helping adults in a child's life work together. In today's conversation, we are unpacking how y'all, parents and teachers, can become allies and build bridges, not barriers, to truly show up for kids we all care about. Get ready for practical tools, real talk, and a fresh look at collaboration that actually works. So, Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Maria. It's great to be back.
Now, what does a truly strong partnership between parents and educators actually look like in practice?
The first word that comes to my mind when you ask me that question is safe and connected. Knowing the commitment that teachers have and that parents have, it's really about being on the same page, but remembering why we're coming together. Remembering that it's our child, our student, who we're committed to having a great life. So it's coming back to that and always remembering when we're talking with a parent, when a parent's talking to a teacher's talking to a parent, that's what we're here for, is for that child, that young person.
How does effective parent and teacher collaboration impact a child's academic success? And
so I think it's about being on the same page. So when parents and teachers and administrators see what, for example, when a child has a challenge in school, a learning challenge, an emotional regulation challenge, a social challenge, that they identify the actual goals for that child, and the child is involved with identifying the goals for themselves. I think that's a key piece.
And what are the biggest barriers to strong parent-teacher relationships? And how can we overcome them, especially when we find ourselves in a situation where each side feels the need to defend their position?
So I think that in schools, it's the role of the administrator, the teacher, to ensure that when that parent comes into that setting, that they feel at ease, they feel heard, they feel listened to, and they feel like they're actually committed to collaborating with that parent, which is different than reporting and blaming. Often I think parents, when teachers have things to share about their child and it's not positive, it's negative, or it doesn't feel good, parents will second guess things or feel like they're being targeted or feel that they're doing a poor job of raising their child. When in fact, if you separate it out from it's anyone's fault, it's about identifying the needs of the child. Are the needs of the child being met emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually? And when we come from that place, I think that it's easier to be on the same page.
And what are practical strategies teachers can establish positive, open communication with parents?
So I think depending on the age of the child, but I really feel like I have children who've gone through the whole school system. And I think that what really makes a difference is when teachers send out a communication at the very beginning of the school year and they just introduce themselves. They say a little bit about themselves, what their interests are, what's their passion in their teaching, and have an open door invitation to communication with them. So whether that's by email, whether that's by phone, coming in physically to the school. But I think it's important to have that be clear at the beginning. These are the times I'm available. I can connect at lunch on Tuesdays and Friday after school. And when the teacher communicates that, the parent, I think, then knows access them. They can have a conversation with them.
Yeah. Now, here's a question that I often get from parents. What advice do you have from parents who would like to foster a strong relationship with teachers? Like, how would they go about that? They want to, but they might not necessarily know how to go about that.
Yeah, I think the first step is to communicate with the teacher and say, I'd like to make sure that you know who I am as a parent, and I'd like to be able to connect. Can we sit down and have a conversation? Typically, that's done at parent-teacher interviews. And some teachers, their schedules are full and they're not physically available, but even a phone conversation. I think it's important that parents can put their eyes on the teacher and the teacher can put their eyes on the parent. So maybe it might be at pickup after school. Maybe it could be at the end of the week on a Friday when everyone's leaving for the day. Can we take 10 minutes? Is it okay if I come into the school and just chat with you and say hello? I think those are important pieces. And the other thing is in the communication is both the parent and the teacher feeling like what their requests are acknowledged and respected and honored. I think that's really challenging when a teacher isn't available. And then what do you do as a parent? And I think it is time then you reach out to the administration and just say, I'm wondering how you could support in me having more connection with my child's teacher. I haven't had that experience where a teacher has never not been willing to meet. It's never happened to me. So I can't speak to what that's like, but I think that's a time to pull in administration to say, can we speak about this? Because this is really important to me.
How can parents and teachers navigate conflicts while keeping the focus on child success, especially when a parent's instinct is to protect their child?
I actually really believe in documenting things. And what I mean by that is setting up a meeting where you can write down together, have notes about the conversation that both the parent and the teacher or administrator can reference in a way of creating trust and clarity. And in those notes you'd include, what are our concerns here at the school? What are your concerns as a parent? Writing those down, identifying them, acknowledging them. Often in conversations, things get forgotten. So this is a way to reference back and to hold account that administrative and teacher team, but also for the parent to have the felt sense that this is what they're committed to because we're documenting it. I think that's really important. And then the other part is to always have an agreement around when are we going to check back in about this? Because often a complaint can be brought forward, but there's no agreed time to review. When are we going to check back in to see how our son or the student is doing? So I think those two pieces are important. And the other is as a parent to come in be open to actually problem solving. Really like, what are the solutions here? So we have to be open to that and come with ideas, but also be open to hearing what the teachers and the school are suggesting. And sometimes that involves having a counselor in the room, having a third party person that is neutral, or the parent at least feels as neutral, and is very child-centered. It could be the learning support teacher. It could be the counselor. I think a third party can sometimes be very beneficial in those situations.
I do see value in meeting with the teacher as a parent and setting some agreements in place, but also setting some timelines into when are we going to check back in. And maybe the structure is working. Maybe the structure needs to be changed in some way, but then we're going to do another check-in until we find something that actually works.
Yeah, and you're going to know that because the child's going to be happy and there's going to be success. And that's the key piece is like, how's the child showing up? How are they managing their learning? What does it look like now? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious about how parents and teachers can collaborate to ensure that children with special needs get the support that they need at home and at school.
This is a tricky situation because the funding in schools, the actual need for the children that are in our schools now is higher than what often the adult can, that they can meet. And so I feel that communication around planning how to support that child is key. Coming together to say, what do we feel is needed here? And it is really important that the school person says, I feel like your child needs more support outside of what I can provide in the classroom, and work with the parent to also supply resources. I think it's important for schools and school counselors too to have lists of resources, people that they can connect to, workshops that they can attend, parenting support. It's not a one-person job. Raising a child, it takes a village. And I think that when parents feel like they have lots that they can reach out for help, then their job becomes easier. A lot of parents, I think, feel that it's all up to them. And a long time ago, children were raised in community. Grandparents were there, aunties and uncles were there. Like it wasn't a one-person job. The learning took place throughout the day from multiple people. And so I think we have to remember that every person involved with our child, a coach, a music teacher, they all bring something to that child. And it's not just up to the parent to do every bit of learning for their child.
Yes, it does take a village to raise a child, and teamwork is incredibly important when we look at supporting the development of a child for sure. And team represents everybody, the teachers, the adults, the music teachers, the coaches, the gymnastics coach. It does include everybody. Now, how can schools create a culture that fosters strong parent and teacher collaboration?
We went to a school, my son attended an elementary school, and once a week, sometimes twice a week, there was an invitation for the parent to join the student in the classroom in their learning. We had reading days, we had math days, we had game days. And I think in the setting of elementary school, that is a really powerful way to have that ongoing connection. In middle school, it's different because there's a separation almost from that. And I'm wondering why that is, right? Yes, teenagers mostly don't want to have their parents around. They're individuating. But what would it look like if that was invited in the culture of the school to do more of that? To have days where maybe after school, because I know parents work and they're not always available, but maybe once a month, it's a show off your work day. Maybe once a month, it's kids get to do a presentation and there's an invitation for grandparents, for parents to come into the class. What would that be like? I wonder. I don't see that in middle schools. And in high school, it often looks very different because there's extracurricular activities, sports that are being played, and parents can be involved that way, but it's out of the classroom setting. So I think we have to look at that. How do we collaborate to circle around that youth so they actually have the experience that they have more than one person that's invested in them in a particular environment?
I know I worked at one school where the counselors once a month invited the parents in right after they dropped off their kids for cookies and tea. And it was a very informal event where anybody could show up. They didn't have to register for anything. And they were able to just then interact with us, ask questions, go get curious. And I thought that was incredible. I also see more parent involvement at the elementary level where parents are coming in and reading with their kids on Friday mornings, for example. And I can see that as they go into middle school and high school, the interactions where they're actually in the classroom or doing something in the school that isn't attending, for example, a sports event is less and less. And I can see that's a missing.
Yeah, it's what's the impact. And I think that when I look at my own son, it's a big leap to go from this sort of supported, connected environment where teachers and parents are, they see that they're together, and then suddenly it's just not cool anymore to have your parent in the school. But that's a culture. What would it be like if it was cool?
Mhm.
You know, what if the kids didn't actually have to defend and protect, that having a parent come around was weird? What if it was just the norm? And I think that getting involved in your kid's school in any way you can. I've offered to coach sports in the school, being able to connect with the teachers. What would it be like if parents could come and hang out with their kids at lunch and play soccer together? I don't know. I don't know what that would take. I don't know how much interruption that would be. I'm curious about it, though. What would it be like?
And I
Yeah.
do see value in being consistent with how involved we are in our kids' education from elementary all the way up to high school. And I have it that it's even more important to be involved in a kid's education as they get older because they're becoming more independent. They're making choices that requires some support from parents. And you actually want to be involved when they become teenagers and when they're in middle schools because they do become more independent. And I think it's very important.
Yeah. And I think what I want to point out is sometimes I think as parents, we think we have to be in there with them. Sometimes it's actually our being a witness. It's our presence and our witnessing. It's actually them having the sense that my mom, my dad, my auntie, my uncle, my grandma, my grandpa, they got my back. And I have the option to invite them in, which is very different than what we call the helicopter parenting, where we do everything for our kids and it doesn't build their competency and their agency. It's a dance. That is an example of co-regulation. It's like, I do a little bit, you do a little bit. But equal in the partnership is both people in that interaction are both equally responsible for making it work. And when that's not happening, then there's actually an imbalance. And it impacts that child's development. It impacts their ability to manage certain skills when they're ready to take that on.
Yes, I do see value in being a witness. I know that growing up when I was in school, it really made a difference when my parents came on field trips with me, when they attended different musicals that I was in, when they attended the choir recitals that we were in, and especially field hockey. I didn't want them to give me opinions about what they saw. I just wanted them to see me as the field hockey player, as the singer in the choir, as the person performing in the musical. And I just remember how excited I would be when I would see my parents in the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real affirmation. It's a direct acknowledgement that you matter.
Mhm.
You matter. Yeah, it actually moves me, right? Because that's what kids need. They need to know that they matter. Yeah.
They need to know that they matter, and they need to be able to show different ways of expressing themselves, whether it be through art, through music, through dance, and have that be acknowledged by the parents.
Yes. Yeah.
When is it time to involve students in meetings about them, and how can we ensure that their voice is actually heard?
Yeah. I actually think that there's a place for kids at all ages to be involved in a meeting, but how it looks is different as they get older. So I think in the beginning, including a child in K to 12, to acknowledge them for what you notice about their strengths, and you can identify where it's hard for them. So that could be them being involved for 10 minutes and then they go off and play in the playground. As kids get older, I think it's important that they have a voice or an expression, even if that's writing down ideas ahead of time and having that shared, them being able to communicate what their needs are, what's missing for them, and having adults acknowledge that. So it could be the parent reading that list, it could be the child reading that list. But I think that's a good preparation, because it's for a young person to be in a room with adults, if there's more than two, it's not necessarily comfortable for them. So we want to bring that sense of confidence and ability that they have a right and a space to express themselves. And then I think as kids get older, really actually playing a big role in identifying their own personal goals in their learning, putting words to it, and then having the adults adapt that so it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, my takeaway from this conversation is actually looking at how often we involve kids in meetings at the schools that I work at. And I can see that we don't involve them that much. And so what I'm going to take away is how can we create structures in which kids can be more involved and that their voice is heard. I think it's very important.
Yeah. And one point I want to make is often we talk about the child. And I think it's important that when a youth is in the room, we speak to that child and we reference. I remember when you said this, Johnny. So what do you think about that? Versus Johnny's doing this and Johnny's doing that. I really think that inclusivity is super important. Because I don't know about you, but if I was in a room and people were sitting around the table talking about me, but none of it was directed to me, it would feel very disconnected. And that's an example of not co-regulation.
And I could see an opportunity for students to be heard in, for example, parent-teacher conferences, where they're often sitting together and they're talking about the child rather than involving the child. So I could see that would be the first step in involving the child in the discussion about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And having reference items. So when you're having a conversation, have something that's involved where you're referencing it, you're looking at it together. What do you think of what I've written down here? And that child reads that if they're able to, or you read it out to them and you say, can you find this comment about you? So there's a document, there's some sharing. I often say mapping is a really powerful way to have a conversation with a student, which looks like a blank piece of paper and you put the goal in the middle. What is it that we're working toward? And then all the ideas that parent, teacher, and child identify get written down the web, right? So you've got the middle piece and then you draw out all the ideas. And that's a working document that can be referenced again. Let's go back and look at our web that we made. How are we doing with this? Let's give it a number. Give it a number between 1 and 10. 10 is I'm rocking it. The 1 is I'm not doing this at all. It's not working. And so that you keep building on that document.
Now, in your book, The Morning Hendrix Lost His Happy, you emphasize the idea that happiness is something that we create. In the context of building relationships between parents and teachers that work, how can this message be applied to fostering shared goals and understanding when supporting a child's emotional and social development?
So I talk about superpower thoughts. I talk about how we think. That how we think, if we can understand how our brain thinks in every moment and any time, and we can be aware of that, it's actually your superpower, because how you think impacts how you feel. It actually gives us our feelings. Our feelings are also borrowed from our experiences. When I think about this particular story, and in my first book in the series, The Mud Hole, there's a similar message, which is we want to be aware of what we're telling ourselves. What am I thinking in this situation? Am I saying that I can't do this and this isn't going to work? Which would probably likely not lead to us feeling happy. Or am I saying, okay, I got to figure this out and I think I can. I might need some help. It's more likely that we're going to feel calmer and in control. And if we say something like, I got this, I can do this, even though it's hard, I can do it anyway. Like I can just give it my best shot. We're more likely to feel confident and happy. So that's the message that I give in the story, that it's an internal job, but we need external support sometimes because we're learning. That's the message.
Stephanie, I have one last question to wrap this up. How can teachers and parents build collaborative relationships and maintain this relationship and trust throughout the whole 10-month school year?
Yeah. The biggest word to me is appreciation and gratitude, right? It's like when we stand in appreciating what the parent is doing, what they're committed to, when we stand in being grateful and appreciating what the teacher is trying to do, what they're committed to, and we look from there, it feels a whole lot better than when we make each other wrong and look for what's not working. It's important to identify that, but to me, collaboration is being on a team and you respect each other's perspectives but you stand in being grateful for what they're offering instead of having to defend or protect something.
Yeah.
And like each other, care about each other, love each other. It's important.
Yeah, it's so important. Thank you so much for coming back and sharing your passion and your advice for how teachers and parents can work collaboratively together to ultimately have a student-centered approach to education and to the ways we raise our children. I want to remind our audience that every trial is a triumph in disguise. Thank you so much.